Nader, thank you for being on my show. I'm looking forward to our conversation today because we're going to be talking about online streaming, something everyone can't get away from at the moment. But just to quickly introduce you, you got a couple of degrees from Yale, INSEAD, and had a bit of an adventure of in life which I know about, and then you've founded Ictomy, which is a digital agency with offices based in Spain and the UAE, and of course I know you grew up in Italy, which is interesting. Post that you led the planning division for MBC, and you launched two SVOD platforms in MENA, and then you went to co-found iFlix MENA, which is a JV with Zain, and you won 500,000 active users in the region in less than 6 months. And and overall you have more than 18 years of experience in the digital entertainment industry. And I also know that you're up to something very interesting at the moment. So yes, I would like to start off with that. What are you doing now?
Thank you very much for the intro. It's been a crazy journey, and I've been in the region now for 11 years, and the vibrancy of the entertainment space over here and the way it's been developing over the past 10 years has been breathtaking. What I'm working on right now has been an evolution of how I feel the entertainment industry is heading towards. So I started off my career, I went to film school as well. I worked in entertainment. I helped launch the first digital footsteps in streaming technologies here in the region as well. And what I'm working right now is kind of the end point, or rather a stepping point of what I see the industry going towards. And the fundamental problem I think we're trying to address is how there are so many streaming services, and how now the new wave is everyone and their dog is launching a streaming service, and how this situation we feel it does not necessarily lead to continuous sustainability for everyone in the long run. So if we double back a second, I know that we've been talking about it. If we talk about any single piece of content, like if we want to watch a movie, an art film called The Square, which did excellently at Cannes a couple of years ago. The Square is a name of a movie which is it's very vague, right? So if you Google The Square, first you have to realize that, oh man, The Square is not enough. You write, okay, The Square movie, and then The Square movie Cannes, and then you get certain results. Even if you do find, and now Google is increasing it, if you do find where it's playing, most of the time it's US-centric. The way content rights goes, you can't really find out on which platform it's actually playing here in the Middle East. So part of the things that we're trying to address is how, for the consumer, the whole entertainment experience has become so fragmented that the experience is not unified anymore.
What would you say to a consumer, or just to an average person who's not from the industry, who believes, like many, that it's just Netflix and Amazon?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Let's talk about how the system has evolved right now. You used to have the big studios, and you have the TV channels, and you had this kind of ecosystem of players. What we have is a situation where the mechanics are such that all these old incumbents, everyone got completely waylaid by the emergence of Netflix. All of a sudden you find this direct-to-customer relationship being ever more valuable. The way content used to be produced would generally be a B2B business.
Yeah.
So you think of, I don't know, pick one, the Discovery Network, or Discovery Network is an interesting one because they're currently having a big fight with OSN, for example. So Discovery used to create its content and then sell it to the channels to broadcast. They would have their own channels on different services, and that was the name of the game. They were primarily a B2B player. But now they see the value. They also see the value of going direct to consumer. So they're also launching different verticals to go direct to consumer. And most of these guys, they never had any real deep knowledge of going directly to consumer. So everyone is launching it. There was a period of time where HBO created this amazing array of content, and people were pitting Netflix and HBO against each other, right? They were saying there was this big conversation about Netflix having to become HBO before HBO can become Netflix. And next year we're actually going to see the battle where HBO is launching its full-on streaming service, or rather, with AT&T, and you've got that full streaming service going on, whereas Netflix has gone from being just a distributor of content to becoming one of the biggest content producers in the world.
You yourself had quite an adventure in the streaming business.
Yes.
With iFlix, Mina. And that was quite a roller coaster ride. So what happened?
So the history of it was, at NBC Group, we launched Shahid.net, which was a great success. And Shahid.net started off as a catch-up service for NBC shows. And then we wanted to create it into the Hulu of the region. It became an SVOD, and now it's the largest SVOD for Arabic content, the leader for that. So that one was very successful. After that success, I left NBC Group and launched Iktomi, and Iktomi becoming a design thinking agency, a lot of digital development, and we helped Stars Play launch in the region. So after Shahid and Stars Play, a small outfit in Malaysia called me up, and at the time they were in 4 countries in Asia, and I joined them on a consulting job just to help them explore what could be done in the region. And so iFlix in Malaysia had a very strong backer in the catch-up group, and they had deep contacts with Hollywood through the Creative Artist Agency, their venture arm called EMC, and we explored the potential of doing something in the Middle East.
And I think they had raised a little bit of money at that point?
They had raised a decent amount at that point. When I joined them, we then together raised about 130 million.
$130 million.
Yeah. So in total, by that point, we then went on to raise $300 million. So it was a big, strong amount, a nice war chest, or sounds like a nice war chest to go out and take over the world.
What does it feel like to see $300 million in a bank account?
I wish I could see it in duffel bags, but the crazy thing is that $300 million, as big as it sounds and as successful a milestone it is, for the content industry, it goes so quickly. And that was part of the challenge. So
their mandate was to be the Netflix of Asia, would that be correct? Or?
Well, what we did at iFlix was we saw that there was a gap. When iFlix first launched, Netflix hadn't grown internationally yet. So it was mostly in the US. So iFlix said, look, the model is great, but just taking Netflix and launching it into Malaysia or into Asia wouldn't work. And it wouldn't work for 3 main reasons. One was content. At the time, Netflix was primarily American, so just purely American products.
What year are we talking about here?
This was, so in 2016.
So that's not very long ago.
Not very long ago. So in 2016, you had 3 problems. Localization of content. So content needs to be significantly more local to gain the massive following of the masses in all these in Asia.
Yeah.
The second one is the product itself. Netflix at the time was a fantastic product. It had HD, had all these things. But if you look at internet penetration and the quality of internet, it was very poor. So you need to change the product and be able to provide different side of innovation in order to make sure that people can actually access the content.
For developing markets.
For developing markets, exactly. So we were actually the pioneers when it came to download and watch offline. So iFlix was the one that first came up with that functionality. And it makes sense because the Philippines, the standard experience was people would go to their coffee shop, grab a coffee for breakfast, use the free Wi-Fi to download download shows, and then they'll jump on a jeepney to go to work, and they'll be stuck in traffic for 3 hours. That's kind of a common Asian experience. So it made sense in that time. And the final thing is the price. At $7.99 or $8.99, Netflix is affordable to most Western markets, to you and I for sure, but for the average person in Southeast Asia, it's actually a lot of money, and there's bigger resistance to pay that. So we came up with this model that would work with the telco to do that. Now,
with the telcos.
With the telcos. So at that point in time, what we saw was that those problems are actually not just Southeast Asian problems, they're emerging markets problems. And so that's when we went to Liberty Global and a variety of other big American firms and Western investors and said, look, we've found something that works for Southeast Asia and that's building up a large amount of scale. We're getting a lot of pickup, we're getting a lot of interest, and we're serving your content to people that were otherwise pirating. And these problems are the same across emerging markets. And that's the fundamental of what helped us raise this money. So we then...
And this money was primarily for buying content?
So we ended up spending a large amount on buying content, but also on just scaling our operations across the globe. So I was one of 3 heads. There was a head of Asia, head of Middle East and North Africa, which is me, and the head of Sub-Saharan Africa. We were also exploring LATAM, but we're already, and this was part of the thing, we overstretched. And what happened was, the arc was this. We had something strong. We built up a real culture within the company. And then we went and scaled and executed phenomenally over the course of 2 years. So from 2016, it was an incredible amount of speed and execution and the deep-seated focus on culture. At a certain point in time, the company became a bit too big, though. And then the focus started getting a bit lost. Things were being dropped off the table. The culture started suffering. We didn't have as much of a focus on culture anymore. And then that balance between going for scale versus actually making sure product market fit exists became a little bit torn. And what I see a lot is a lot of startups that get completely caught up with this race to scale, and you don't focus on the fundamentals anymore. And that's a common occurrence. I mean, we've seen it with WeWork, we've seen it with Fetcher over here. You get this drastic change where you're overstretching so much that you're no longer able to sustain it.
Was it more about the winner will take all, as opposed to building a business with sound financials? Would that be a good way to put it?
I believe so in a certain extent. I think the market conversations and the conversations that you have with investors is, it used to be growth at any cost, and just make sure that you can build yourself up to be too big to fail. Once you get out of orbit, then you're kind of you're the satellite that's already there. You're in space. It's okay. You can then,
you can't be touched.
You can't be touched. Whereas with significant costs and this inability to actually get the fundamentals right, you just run out of time. And and no matter how much you pivot, at a certain point you get into this panicked, continuous pivoting. And once you start losing talent, once you start losing faith, that's when things start getting a bit tough. So I left iFlix in 2018. They had gone through a pivot, an evolution rather, from SVOD to AVOD as well.
What's AVOD for those of us?
Sorry. So as a quick primer on how complicated the industry has gotten, we think about back in the day, we used to have television and the cinema. And that's great. Something's on the cinema, you're going to watch it there, and then you maybe get it on your VHS, and then you wait a little bit longer and it's on TV. Then all of a sudden you had pay TV and you had cable. And it's like, okay, great, you've got a premium. The window started getting shorter between cinema, TV, and TV. Then you started getting more. You get the digital space, and then you had iTunes, and you could buy and rent movies digitally. And then you started getting these all-you-can-eat models. So Netflix pioneered that, and that's your subscription video on demand. So you jump into Netflix, you subscribe, and you can watch as much of what they have as possible. What they have is a small selection of the entire universe of content, but their job is to curate enough content, that keeps you attractive. They then realize that, well, at a certain point in time, all these channels are going to get worried because we're going to become too powerful, and they're going to pull some of their content back. So they started creating their own content. So those are the subscription video on demand services. Now, at the same time, a lot of companies realized that, well, look, TV was built on an advertising model, and that worked really well. Why don't we do the same thing, but on demand? So advertising video on demand is simply, you can watch anything you like, and it'll be professional TV series or movies, but you have to have ad breaks in between. And
it'll be free to watch?
It'll be free to watch. The cost is your eyeballs. So, and that, again, slots into what we call the windows of exploitation.
Right.
So first and foremost is movies. So a movie comes up. It changes for movies and for TV series. But movies start off, and there used to be a law that in different countries you have different laws of how long it can be. There's a cinema window before it can go onto all the other services. In the Middle East, it was interesting because in Saudi you didn't have cinema halls, right? So the window between cinema and TV was a lot shorter, and that kind of helped bring NBC to the powerhouse that it is today.
So iFlix was pivoting.
Yeah.
You left the company.
I left the company. So I had created the JV with Zain Telecom. We hired a CEO for iFlix MENA. I moved to a global advisory role, and then at a certain point I realized that I think my role did not fit. But the company is great. I loved the team there. I wish them luck, and I left. So I spent a bit of time ruminating about where the industry is going. And what we saw was you've got so many issues with the way professional movies and TVs are being made and distributed. And we're seeing this rise to kind of a boiling point, but it's like your proverbial frog, that if you put a frog in water and slowly turn up the heat, it'll boil to death, as opposed to if he jumps into hot water, he'll bounce out. I feel that the industry is kind of boiling itself to death. That we used to have cable, which was super expensive, and only a smaller percentage of people used to buy it, because they would throw in all these packages to you and just slap on a fee to you, and then suddenly on demand made it cheaper, and it became so exciting for it. It became so much so that piracy globally started decreasing for a while. And now in the last 4 years, we're seeing that tick up again because everyone's pulling different parts out, and everything is everywhere. There are too many models, too many services. There's just this disaggregated feel.
And so there's an opportunity for aggregation.
There's an opportunity for aggregation. The competitors to our industry are significant. We think of millennials who are already pretty disenchanted with TV. And then you look at Gen Z, which don't even consider TV. Man, they don't even consider our social media as interesting anymore. The rise of TikTok, the speed at which it's taken over, that form of content and consumption of content makes it so that we have to create the experiences in order to bring them back. And basically, over that year in 2018, I spent some time. I had a baby, so I had a
Congratulations.
lot of time. Thank you. And I had a lot of time sitting, feeding the baby to be able to think of, well, what I want to watch. And I'd think of something, and I wouldn't know where to find it. And then I would think, man, this is way too complicated. Everything's too complicated. There's no single unified experience that can actually bring me together. And so that's kind of what we built. We built a single interface that unifies the TV experience for you. And when I say TV, I mean movies and series, but any professional content.
Isn't Google working on something like that at the moment?
So that's amazing, right? So Google was there to organize the world's information. The way they do it right now is they are increasingly showing where Western content can be found, but it's still predominantly US-centric. And just the search function is not enough because
you need to go somewhere else, search, and then find the platform.
And then find the platform, and then jump into the platform and see if the region is correct, if that information is still there, if the integrations are in place. And there's a difference because what we started thinking of was not only the experience from the user perspective, but from the industry perspective. What do they need? What do the services need in order to really provide a better service to the user? And so what we did was we started creating a toolkit that became a lot more useful for the services. And that's kind of what we're launching right now.
So what you're building is an interface, a single interface for a user to enjoy all of the services that they are subscribed to. Would that be correct in a nutshell?
The way we like to think about it is this. You have a keyring, and right now it's really hard to unlock so many doors because different keys allow you to access different things, and each one of those doors leads to different pockets of content. So we become kind of your digital keyring for all your services, and we tell you where everything is, we tell you how to get there, we tell you what you'd like to watch, and we kind of sit above and help direct across all of them. We simplify life when there's a world of content that becomes more complicated and confusing as more and more services are being launched.
So now that you're doing your own startup and you've come out of this adventure with iFlix, what lessons have you learned and what kind of things would you want to do differently this time around?
Probably the most important thing that I learned from iFlix is how culture can trump strategy. And it's been something that's been often said, but to experience how a proper culture and a commitment to culture can actually help you develop the right strategies and help you scale appropriately, help you keep people committed to the company and keep people giving their entire life energy within that space of time, and to treat them correctly, treat them well, and to be fair. That those values and that kind of commitment to people is something that is absolutely fundamental. Following that, it's also about getting the model right at its fundamental level and not search for scale at any cost. I think we're already seeing the pendulum swing where it's not just about how you're not as good as your last raise, it's actually what is your model doing for you.
And do you have a path to profitability?
Absolutely, absolutely. To have that conscious choice to make sure that the unit economics works, to have that conscious choice that everything that you're doing is for a reason.
The flip side of that obviously is that if winner takes all as a statement is true, then you can't have a land grab as you would if you were willing to scale at any cost.
I always find it interesting that it's not necessarily the first one to put the pieces of the puzzle in place, but it's generally the last person to put the last piece of the puzzle in place that tends to win. And we're talking about a game where we don't know how many pieces of the puzzle are there. So that in that kind of dynamic, what we're seeing is within our ecosystem, there are a lot of people putting different pieces of the puzzle in place right now. We feel that we've got enough pieces, our piece to put in connects enough to emerge the picture. And if we get to see that picture early enough, we can fill in the pieces better. But it's about seeing that picture and seeing how that picture changes as well.
I think it's very...
That metaphor got a bit mixed, but you get...
No, I get it completely, and it's refreshing to come across a startup, a tech startup that's from the beginning thinking about sound fundamentals. Of course, I've seen the deck, and I think it's all the more exciting because for any investor, if there is a path to profitability, and if the product itself is so fundamentally strong, and there is a way to get users on board without having to spend millions and millions and millions on acquisition, is certainly very appealing.
One of the fallacies right now is that we tend to hear only the big successes and the big failures. There's a whole generation of startups that are the unsung heroes, and they're not the big unicorns, but you've got a lot of very strong, good startups that have been building steadily. And we're seeing, I feel that recently I've come across a lot more of these entrepreneurs that are shying away from the big story. They don't want to be the heroes. They just want to build good things. And I think that's the right attitude to have. We don't have the answers. Like, we don't have all the answers, but what we have is a systematic method to find solutions. And it's all about getting that next existential problem right. I remember, one of my CEOs used to ask me, his favorite question in an interview was, "Are you a thinker or are you a doer?" And it was an interesting one, right? You ask someone, "Are you a thinker or are you a doer?" As an entrepreneur, we tend to value doing, because if you overthink it, if you try and get it perfect, the world has changed, and your solution is no longer applicable. Don't overthink it, do it, test it, learn, and keep going, right? I always felt a little uncomfortable with that question. My answer was always, doing, though my favorite answer to that question is, I think I'm a doer, which automatically tells you what it is. But I found the problem with that is that it puts it as a dichotomy. It puts it in conflict, thinking and doing. Rather than just being a thinker or a doer, I'd like to see a closer, is someone who knows when to think, when to do, when to rethink, when to redo. Because you don't want to be caught in the cycle of just doing and then undoing and then doing again and undoing. And
it has to be a fair balance between thought and execution, isn't it?
It's got to be. With a lean towards execution, because otherwise you're too virtualized. Get that answer from the market.
Because if you're just hyper-testing, hyper-growing, hyper-doing all the time, that obviously comes at a cost, because you're going to have failures. And yes, we should embrace failure, and we should be proud of how many times we've failed, but ultimately that comes at a cost, and it might be end us to a situation where we're doomed as a business. So we've got to play our cards well.
If you're not making mistakes, you're not going fast enough, but there's a difference between small mistakes and errors, just quick mistakes, and complete lapses of judgment and existential crisis mistakes. I trust my team enough that they're not going to make those huge ones, and I trust the chain of command enough that they're going to prevent those things from happening. But everything else, you made a quick mistake, you thought you'd try an interesting approach with a potential partner and it fell flat. It's great. We learned that doesn't work. How can we adapt it next time? You can still go back to it. Everything's a relationship based. Everything is relationship based, and everything's dynamic and conversation based. There are very few occasions where a closed door is closed forever. Yeah.
So you should make more decisions, but not at the cost of the existence of the business itself.
Don't bet the house.
Yeah. Looking at online streaming over the next 5 years, what do you think is going to happen? Are we going to see Netflix spend more and more and more on content, or are we going to see a ton of more players and Netflix will have to actually pull back? What's your view on what's going to happen?
It's absolutely fascinating, right? So you've got the situation where all of a sudden you've got, if we talk about it globally, in the region we've got also different dynamics at play when we talk about Arabic content. But if we talk about globally, Netflix has been the leading light. It's a, you know, is it a content company? Is it a tech company? It's both. It's neither. It's Netflix, and they're spending more and more on content. But you see the evolution of how they're spending on content, their algorithm, data-based judgments on which series to start, which series to continue, which series to cancel. And we start realizing how much of their real fundamental IP is valuable or not. We compare it to the channels. There's a reason why Friends was the most valuable piece of the puzzle, particularly when it comes to the streaming wars. You've got that recognizability, that recognition, that continuity, and all of those various channels which are launching. I mean, Peacock is launching. You've got HBO that's launching. You've got, well, with Warner, and you've got Disney Plus. You've got Apple TV Plus. All of these players are all coming in with their slight different content library. There's more amazing content to see than ever before. But the cost to the user becomes too high. How many are you willing to stack? And that becomes a bit problematic. But everyone's talking about these streaming wars as if it's just going to be a complete bloodbath from the get-go. But if you think about it, every single one has a slightly different strategy in order to make sure that they get a piece of the pie. And if we think about the raw numbers of it, Netflix currently has the most number of users, and it's kind of the one to beat. And if it continues doing what it's doing, it will still be worthwhile to have that account. Disney Plus is an absolute beast when it comes to the content and it owns. Apple TV Plus, here it becomes interesting, you get for free if you own an Apple TV product or an Apple product. Amazon Prime Video, again, it's packaged with your Amazon Prime, so it doesn't feel like an extra cost. And so you start getting into all these pieces and you realize that every single one has a slight subsidization here and there. Everyone's going to try different subsidizations when it comes to their telco provider, so on and so forth. So what we're seeing is there's going to be a massive game of how can we convince the customer to at least have access to my service, and then it's going to be a game of can I make them watch it, feel connected enough that it's actually worthwhile. And there the game becomes really confusing.
Because we were speaking earlier, and you know, a lot of the platforms have a great deal of churn.
Yes, absolutely, and that's exactly that's the fundamental game over here. In this context, Netflix is probably the one to beat. I mean, they have, I think they have a retention rate that's above 70%. I think it's 75 to even 80%. But if you think about that, that still means that 20 to 25% of their user base drops off the service every year. We're still talking about 30, 40 million people.
Yeah.
And that's huge.
And there are other platforms that have significantly lower retention rates.
Absolutely right. And so the game is, how many people can you acquire, put into the funnel, make sure that you serve them the right content, and then reduce the amount falling out. Now, the question is less, are you going to be able to stop churn completely? Because I don't think that you can eradicate churn. But what you can do is try and make churn less expensive. And so create that facility to bring them back. Make it easier to keep coming back to watch the stuff that they want to watch.
And that's where you come in, and that's your value proposition.
That's right.
For the streamers.
Services.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that they understand that if you can't defeat churn completely, which you can't,
sure,
that even the small, and they will do a good job at reducing their churn somewhat. We can help them out in that endeavor, but then we can make sure that the access point to bring them back is a lot easier, and that recommendation, that function, that relationship becomes a lot stronger. What we want to do is create a deeper connection between the audience and professional TV content as a whole. Unify the TV experience so that it becomes easier for someone to connect to what they really want to watch, or when they don't know what they want to watch, to find something that's really worthwhile.
The Google of streaming services, would that be an appropriate analogy?
I don't know, after the heads of Google have left, and we don't know what Google is going to be or become anymore. Rather than don't be evil, we like to ask, well, what will you watch next?
On that note, Nader, thank you very much for being here today. It's a very exciting venture, and I think it's a service and a startup that's much needed, not only in this region, but I hope globally. And so I wish you all the best, and yeah, thank you for being here today.
Excellent. Always a pleasure to talk to you.